The last time we were reviewing after school, we just kind of made it up to the establishment of some of the colonies. But we had made it all the way through New England, and we had established New England. And in New England, we talked about Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So we had established all those colonies. And then we had established Maryland and also Virginia. And we had, talked about the establishment of those colonies and some other related things. And certainly where we left it was with sort of two regions of British North America being settled prior to the English Civil Wars. Now, the English Civil War, 1840, not really my line of work. Oliver Cromwell, leads a Puritan sort of revolt, and the king is beheaded. We know this, that during that time period, there is kind of a slowdown in immigration to America. The Great Migration of Puritans is 1630 to 1640, sort of a prelude to that. The Puritans are going to leave England largely because they're increasingly going to feel that England is, in terrible shape, the high church movement, and for other reasons. But when the war actually starts, then that migration slows down. It slows down to the Chesapeake region, which is Maryland and Virginia. It also slows down to New England. After the entire revolution ends, the Civil War ends, and eventually King Charles II is restored to the throne, which we call the Restoration, then there is another kind of movement of colonization. And it kind of comes in a few clusters. Cluster one would be the Carolinas, and that was 1663, the Carolinas. Cluster two would be New York and New Jersey. And New York and New Jersey is 1664. And then cluster three would be Pennsylvania and Delaware. And Pennsylvania and Delaware is 1681. So that's going to establish 6 additional colonies, right? Now, in terms of the Carolinas, right, originally the Carolinas were a proprietary colony. Just for fun, real fast, when we talked about proprietary colonies, we said that Maryland was a proprietary colony as opposed to a joint stock, operation. What was the difference? What was a proprietary colony? Just for fun, real fast. Anybody remember, we distinguish between joint stock operations and proprietary colonies. Does anybody remember anything at all? Dear Polymechka.
Isn't it like one person that owns like a land or something?
Well, either one or a group of people are granted a large tract of land upon which they can establish colonies and which they have great discretion over. I mean, the king would grant to somebody or some group of people areas that they could colonize. And in those areas, those proprietors basically were the agents of the king. I mean, they were the king in those areas. And so it was up to them to dispose of that land in whatever manner or whatever way they wanted to. The proprietors, and I think there were 8 of them for the Carolinas, intended, well, I should say this, the proprietors that established Carolina, that were granted a proprietary grant for that territory, the territory north of Florida, which was Spanish, and south of Virginia, received that proprietary grant for their assistance of Charles II in the Restoration. And their intent, if you remember, do you remember anything about the establishment of the Carolinas, 1663, of Carolina initially? What the intent of the original proprietors were? Go ahead, Jason H.U.
I believe to supply the Caribbean.
Yeah, I mean, immediately there was a connection with Barbados. And remember, the proprietors either hoped to provide the Caribbean with foodstuffs or be able to grow, some cash crops themselves. And in particular, given their connections with Barbados, what cash crop did the proprietors... Go ahead, Richard, you were on fire, my friend.
Sugar.
Whoa, way to go, sugar, which was an extremely lucrative cash crop, but it was too cold for sugar, too hot for what, Jason?
Rice?
No, tobacco. You desperately want to say rice. And the reason that Jason wants to say rice is eventually the cash crop that takes hold in the southern part of the Carolinas is in fact rice, right? Which was considered to be a fairly exotic cash crop, which is kind of frightening in itself for Europeans. And rice plantations were established in the southern part of Carolina. Sugar, it was too cold. Tobacco, it was too hot. Rice became the cash crop. Something else we said about the southern part of the Carolinas and the main port city there, Charlestown or Charleston. And this might be significant. The Carolinas kind of pioneer something. Anybody remember what we talked about we associate with the southern part of Carolina besides rice plantations? Anybody recall? Go ahead, Richards.
What about slaves?
That's exactly what we would say. It is the Southern Carolinians who are the first people to sort of establish the infrastructure of slavery in the United States. I shouldn't say in the United States, in the British colonies. Remember, they have this connection with Barbados. In the British Caribbean, there is slavery, slave codes, established infrastructure of slavery. They bring that infrastructure with them to Southern Carolina. Now, eventually, remember, Northern Carolina takes on a separate identity from the southern part of Carolina because it's different. The southern part of Carolina has the large rice plantations, has the port city of Charlestown, which becomes Charleston, has the slaves, has the social stratification. The northern part of Carolina was an overflow colony. People who fled the southern part of Carolina looking for better land, people who left other places looking for somewhere to go to grow tobacco, people coming in from Virginia, people coming in from Europe. The northern part of Carolina was a far more ragtag sort of population. They didn't have a good port city. They had the Outer Banks, so they didn't have access necessarily to the sea. And so the northern part of Carolina takes on a separate identity, which is eventually consummated when both of the colonies become royal colonies, when they are taken over from the proprietors. Now, how about New York? What do you remember about New York and New Jersey? Anything at all about the colonization? What would we say would be significant? Go ahead, H.U.
It was occupied by the Dutch.
It was a territory that was already occupied. Remember, Charles II granted it to whom? Do you remember, Emery? It was somebody he was intimately connected with. He granted that territory between New England and Maryland to whom? Do you remember? You do not. Emily, do you recall? James II, the Duke of York, who was his brother. All right? So he granted territory that was claimed by the Dutch to his brother on the contingency that his brother would go and take it, which he does. And so what James does is seize a Dutch colony and claim it for Britain. And remember, we said that when James took the New Netherlands, right, which he renamed New York, the Dutch and the others were there did not resist. They weren't necessarily content with Dutch rule. And so when the Dutch leader of the colony said, okay, we're going to fight the British because they're going to come and take us over, the people there said, no, we're not. We were just as happy being under their rule as we would be under your rule. And when James took over, he did confirm the proprietary rights of the people that owned property. One thing that James did not want to do is grant the new colony a representative assembly. But because so many Puritans went into New York, eventually James was forced to do that. He was forced to grant the people that went to New York a representative assembly, and then New Jersey was simply sort of an extension of that. Now we have Pennsylvania and Delaware. Now what do we know, Kendick, about Pennsylvania and Delaware? We know something about that, do we not? Yes, it was a proprietary grant. So the proprietary grant in the Carolinas were to the 8 proprietors. The proprietary grant to New York was to James II. The proprietary grant to Pennsylvania was to William Penn. Amuya, why did William Penn receive such a grant? Do you recall? Pardon me?
He was part of the Quakers.
Well, William Penn was in fact a Quaker, right? That is true, yes. But why did the king give a Quaker that was a persecuted, considered to be radical religious sect a proprietary grant, dear O'Toole?
He owed William Penn's father.
Ah, so you are saying to me, dear